A man rescues twin beggar girls on Christmas Eve and is stunned by what he finds hours later. The bitter December wind howled through the darkened alley, carrying stinging flurries of snow. Emma, barely 6 years old, wrapped her thin arms tighter around her trembling twin sister Olivia, pressing them both against the cold brick wall. Their matching blue eyes, wide with fear, watched the entrance to their makeshift shelter behind a dumpster. Shh, Emma whispered, feeling Olivia's silent tears soaking through her threadbare jacket. I promise it'll be okay, she winced as the movement reopened the fresh cut on her lip, a reminder of their mother's last drunken rage before abandoning them hours ago. The sound of approaching footsteps made both girls freeze. Emma instinctively shifted to shield Olivia, ignoring the pain from the bruises hidden beneath her clothes. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by the crunch of snow. "Hello," a man's voice called out, gentle but uncertain. "Is someone there?" Emma held her breath, her small hand covering Olivia's mouth. A beam of light swept across their hiding place, revealing a tall figure in medical scrubs. The man crouched down, his face emerging from the shadow's kind eyes, worried expression. "Oh my God," he breathed, immediately shrugging off his coat. "You must be freezing." He moved slowly, telegraphing each movement like approaching wounded animals. "I'm Jack. I'm a nurse at St. Mary's. Are you hurt?" Emma felt Olivia trembling against her. They'd been warned never to trust strangers, but something in Jack's voice reminded her of the father they'd never known. Her eyes darted to the hospital ID card hanging from his scrubs. "Please," Olivia whimpered, breaking her silence for the first time that night. "We're so cold." Jack inched closer, holding out his coat like a peace offering. "I can help you," he said softly. "There's warm food at my house, and my mother makes the best hot chocolate in town." He paused, studying their faces. "I promise you'll be safe." Emma looked at her sister, then back at Jack. In that moment, she made a decision that would change all their lives forever. With shaking hands, she reached out and took the offered coat. "I'm Emma," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the howling wind. "This is my sister Olivia, our mom. She left us here. She said she'd come back, but her voice broke as tears finally spilled down her frost-bitten cheeks." Jack's heart shattered as he gathered both girls into his arms, feeling their tiny bodies shivering against him. "It's okay," he murmured. "Everything's going to be okay now." None of them could have known just how much those words would be tested in the days to come. Jack Thompson's world had always revolved around two things: caring for his mother Susan and his work as a pediatric nurse at St. Mary's Hospital. At 40, his life was a carefully orchestrated balance of hospital shifts and home care, leaving little room for anything else. But beneath his calm exterior lay a history of struggle and sacrifice that had shaped him into the man he'd become. 20 years earlier, Jack had watched his father Thomas Thompson's slow descent into terminal illness, witnessing how it broke not only his father's body but also his mother's spirit. Susan Thompson, once a vibrant child psychologist, had fallen into deep depression after Thomas's death. The medical bills had stripped away their savings, forcing them to move from their comfortable suburban home to the modest house they now occupied. At just 19, Jack had abandoned his dreams of medical school, instead pursuing nursing to start earning sooner. The memory of those early years remained vivid, attending nursing classes during the day, working night shifts at a convenience store, and somehow finding time to ensure his mother took her medications. There were nights he'd found Susan staring blankly at old family photos, lost in her grief, and mornings when getting her out of bed seemed an impossible task. The local community had slowly forgotten the accomplished psychologist Susan once was, now seeing only a fragile widow who rarely left her home. But Jack knew better. Even in her darkest moments, Susan's innate warmth and wisdom remained. On her better days, she would sit in her favorite armchair by the window, offering gentle advice to any neighborhood child who happened to stop by. These glimpses of his mother's former self kept Jack's hope alive that she might one day fully recover. His work at St. Mary's became his sanctuary. In the pediatric ward, Jack found purpose in comforting sick children and supporting worried parents. His colleagues often remarked on his natural ability to connect with the most withdrawn or frightened patients. What they didn't know was how each scared child reminded him of his younger self, waiting in sterile hospital corridors while his father underwent treatment. The hospital's social worker, Sarah Jenkins, had become his closest friend over the years, sharing his frustration with a system that sometimes failed the children who needed help most. Together, they'd worked countless cases, trying to protect vulnerable kids from falling through the cracks. Yet for every success story, there were heartbreaking failures that haunted Jack's dreams. Living in the modest blue house on Maple Street, Jack and Susan had developed their own quiet routine. He'd prepare her meals before leaving for his shifts, call during his breaks to check on her, and spend his free time maintaining their small home. The neighbors had grown used to seeing him shovel snow from their walkway in winter, or tend to Susan's beloved rose garden in summer. Some pitied him, seeing a middle-aged man whose life had been stalled by duty. Others admired his dedication. But few understood the deep bond between mother and son, forged in grief and strengthened by years of mutual dependency. What no one realized, not even Jack himself, was how this carefully constructed life had prepared him for the moment he would find two frightened little girls in that snowy alley. His years of nursing had taught him to recognize trauma, while caring for Susan had given him endless patience. Even their humble home, with its spare bedroom once intended for the family he never had time to build, seemed to have been waiting for this moment. Emma and Olivia Morrison's early years were marked by fleeting moments of joy, overshadowed by prolonged periods of darkness. Born to Lisa Morrison on a spring morning 6 years ago, the twins had entered the world with matching blonde curls and striking blue eyes. In those first few months, Lisa had been a doting mother, proudly dressing her daughters in identical outfits and documenting their earliest milestones with maternal pride. But the facade of domestic bliss began crumbling when the twins were barely 2. Lisa's drinking, once confined to weekend parties, crept into her daily routine. The transformation was gradual. A glass of wine with lunch became a bottle, then 2. Empty bottles began accumulating in the recycling bin, then under the sink, and finally scattered across their small apartment floor. The twins learned early to recognize the subtle changes in their mother's behavior, the slurred words, the unsteady gait, the unpredictable mood swings. Emma, 7 minutes older than Olivia, assumed the role of protector almost instinctively. She developed an uncanny ability to read their mother's moods, learning to anticipate the storms before they broke. When Lisa's temper flared, Emma would create distractions, knocking over a glass or making noise in another room, anything to draw attention away from her quieter twin. The small scar above her left eyebrow, hidden beneath her bangs, testified to one such intervention. Olivia, more sensitive and withdrawn, became the family's silent observer. She learned to make herself invisible during their mother's rages, often hiding in the cramped space behind the washing machine. At night she would whisper her fears to Emma in their shared bed, their small hands clasped together in the darkness. Despite their different coping mechanisms, the twins developed an almost telepathic bond, communicating through subtle glances and gentle squeezes of reassurance. Their apartment became a revolving door of Lisa's boyfriends, each one staying briefly before disappearing without explanation. Some were kind, bringing candy and small toys. Others brought tension and arguments that echoed through the thin walls. The twins never knew their father. Lisa would only say he wasn't ready for family life when she was sober, or curse his name when drunk. School became their sanctuary. Despite irregular attendance, and often arriving hungry, both girls showed remarkable intelligence. Emma excelled in mathematics, while Olivia displayed an unusual talent for art. Their first grade teacher, Mrs. Anderson, noticed the signs of neglect: unwashed clothes, missed meals, unexplained bruises and filed reports with child services. But Lisa always managed to pull herself together for the social worker's visits, presenting a convincing image of a struggling single mother doing her best. The worst nights were when Lisa disappeared for days, leaving the 6-year-olds to fend for themselves. Emma would raid the kitchen for whatever food remained, carefully rationing crackers and cereal between them. Olivia kept watch by the window, waiting for their mother's return. They learned to survive on school lunches, to wash their clothes in the bathtub, to avoid answering the door or phone. Their small world shrank to include only each other, their bonds strengthening with each abandonment. That final Christmas Eve had begun like any other day, with Lisa promising to buy presents once she borrowed some money instead. She'd returned home drunk, more agitated than usual. The twins recognized the dangerous glint in her eyes, the way her hands shook as she reached for another bottle. When she grabbed Olivia's arm too roughly, Emma intervened. The resulting chaos ended with the girls being dragged to the alley, Lisa's parting words, "I'll be right back," carried away by the winter wind. The neighborhood surrounding Maple Street had always prided itself on being a close-knit community where everyone knew each other's business for better or worse. When Jack Thompson arrived home that Christmas Eve with 2 unfamiliar children in tow, the news spread through the community with the speed of a winter wildfire. From behind curtained windows, curious eyes watched as he ushered the twins into his modest house, speculation already brewing over coffee cups and phone lines. Margaret Wilson, the self-appointed neighborhood watchdog from across the street, was the first to raise concerns. A retired schoolteacher with too much time on her hands, she began making calls to her extensive network of local contacts. A single man, living with his invalid mother, suddenly bringing home 2 little girls in the middle of the night. "Something's not right," she whispered into her phone, her words planting seeds of doubt throughout the community. At St. Mary's Hospital, the whispers took on a different tone. Jack's colleagues, who had known him for years as a dedicated pediatric nurse, found themselves divided. Some, like Dr. Rachel Foster from the children's ward, defended his actions vigorously. Jack Thompson has spent 15 years caring for sick children. If he says those girls needed help, I believe him, she argued during a staff meeting. Others, particularly Hospital Administrator Richard Blake, worried about liability issues and the hospital's reputation by association. The local police department received 3 anonymous calls that first week, each suggesting something suspicious about the situation. Officer David Mitchell, who had known Jack since high school, found himself obligated to conduct a preliminary investigation, though his instincts told him the concerns were unfounded. The sight of Jack's pained expression when he arrived to ask questions made the veteran officer question the community's rush to judgment. At Riverside Elementary School, where Emma and Olivia would eventually be enrolled, the Parent-Teacher Association buzzed with concerned discussions. What if these girls are running from something? What if their real parents come looking for them here? Worried PTA President Karen Davis, voicing the fears of many parents, Principal James Harrison found himself fielding calls from anxious parents, questioning the safety of allowing their children to attend school alongside 2 unknown children with a mysterious past. Even the church community, where Susan Thompson had once been an active member before her decline, became a battleground of opposing viewpoints. Reverend Michael Andrews tried to promote compassion and understanding, reminding his congregation about the true meaning of Christian charity. Yet after Sunday services, clusters of parishioners would gather in the parking lot, their conversations filled with thinly veiled concerns and judgments. The local grocery store became a hub of gossip, where casual shopping trips turned into information-gathering missions. Customers would linger near the checkout, sharing heard-it-from-a-friend stories about the Thompson situation. Mary Sullivan, the longtime cashier who had watched Jack grow up, found herself defending him countless times. "I've known that boy since he was knee-high," she would say firmly. "If he's taken those girls in, he must have a good reason." The situation reached a boiling point when anonymous letters began appearing in neighboring mailboxes, suggesting a need for community action to protect their children. These letters, though unsigned, bore the unmistakable stamp of Margaret Wilson's dramatic flair for creating controversy. The once peaceful neighborhood found itself divided between those who supported Jack's humanitarian act and those who saw danger in his unconventional decision. As winter deepened, the Thompson house became an island of isolation in a sea of community suspicion. Yet behind its walls, unnoticed by the judging eyes of neighbors, a different story was unfolding, one of healing, hope, and the formation of an unconventional family bound not by blood, but by love and circumstance. The old grandfather clock in the Thompsons' living room struck 9 as Jack guided Emma and Olivia through the front door, its familiar chime seeming to pause in recognition of this extraordinary moment. The warmth of the house enveloped them immediately, carrying the lingering scent of Susan's Christmas baking, a hobby she maintained even in her weakened state. The twins stood hesitantly in the entryway, their small hands still clutching Jack's coat, their eyes wide as they took in their surroundings. "Jack, is that you, dear?" Susan's voice called from the living room, its usual frailty tinged with curiosity. She appeared in the doorway, leaning heavily on her walking stick, and stopped abruptly at the sight before her. For a moment, the only sound was the gentle hum of the heating system and the distant carolers on the street outside. Emma instinctively stepped slightly in front of Olivia, a protective gesture that didn't go unnoticed by Susan's experienced eye. The older woman's face softened immediately, years of psychological training kicking in despite her retirement. "Oh, you poor dears," she breathed, her voice gentle. "You must be freezing. Come, sit by the fire." The living room, with its worn but comfortable furniture and walls lined with family photos, felt like stepping into another world for the twins. A small Christmas tree stood in the corner, its lights twinkling softly, a few wrapped presents scattered beneath it. Susan settled into her favorite armchair, patting the ottoman beside her invitingly. Mum, Jack began, his voice catching slightly. "This is Emma and Olivia. They needed help." The simplicity of his statement hung in the air, carrying the weight of all he couldn't say in front of the girls. Susan's eyes met his, understanding passing between them in that wordless way developed through years of shared hardship. "I'll make some hot chocolate," Jack announced, heading toward the kitchen. Emma's eyes followed him anxiously until Susan gently drew their attention with a soft question about whether they liked marshmallows in their cocoa. Olivia nodded shyly, speaking for the first time since entering the house. "Yes, please," she whispered. In the kitchen, Jack's hands shook slightly as he heated the milk. Through the doorway, he could hear his mother's gentle voice, asking the girls about their favorite Christmas songs, skillfully avoiding any questions that might trigger painful memories. The sound of Olivia's quiet giggle at something Susan said made his heart clench. Returning with 4 steaming mugs on a tray, Jack found Emma had moved closer to Susan's chair, examining a framed photo of a young Jack on the side table. "Is this you?" she asked, looking up at him as he set down the tray. "You look sad in the picture." Susan answered before Jack could. "That was taken just after his father, my husband, passed away. We were both very sad." Then she reached out slowly, telegraphing her movement, and touched Emma's hand gently. "But you know what? Even the deepest sadness doesn't last forever, especially when you have people who love you." As the night progressed, the twins gradually relaxed, their exhaustion becoming evident as they struggled to keep their eyes open. Susan suggested they use the spare bedroom upstairs, previously used for storage, but still containing a full-sized bed. Jack found clean sheets and his old childhood pajamas, which, though far too big, were warm and soft. The moment that would stay with Jack forever came as he was turning to leave the bedroom. Emma's voice, small but clear, stopped him. "Mr. Jack," she called. Are you sure we can stay?" Jack turned back, his heart breaking at the fear and hope warring in her expression. "Yes, Emma. You and Olivia can stay as long as you need to." He watched as the sisters curled together under the blankets, their blonde heads close together on the shared pillow. Downstairs, he found Susan still in her chair, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, Jack," she whispered. "What those precious girls must have been through." She reached for his hand, squeezing it with surprising strength. "We have to help them." Jack sank onto the couch, the events of the night finally catching up with him. "I know, Mom. But how? I have to work tomorrow night. The hospital's short-staffed for Christmas, and I can't." His voice trailed off as the enormity of what he'd taken on hit him. "We'll figure it out," Susan said firmly, a spark of her old determination shining through. "Together." Neither of them could have known that upstairs Emma and Olivia lay awake, whispering to each other in the darkness, daring to hope that maybe, just maybe, they had found something they'd never had before, a real home. The change in Susan Thompson began subtly at first, so gradually that even Jack almost missed the early signs. The morning after the twins' arrival, he found his mother already awake and in the kitchen, a remarkable departure from her usual routine of remaining in bed until mid-morning. She was attempting to make pancakes, her hands trembling slightly as she stirred the batter, but her eyes held a focus he hadn't seen in years. "The girls need a proper breakfast," she explained simply when she caught his surprised expression. "Growing children can't start their day with toast and coffee like you do, Jack." There was a gentle admonishment in her voice that reminded him of his childhood before illness and grief had dimmed her spirit. Over the next few days, Susan began emerging from her bedroom more frequently, spending longer periods in her chair in the living room. But instead of staring listlessly out the window as she had for years, she engaged with Emma and Olivia. Her hands, usually shaking from her medications, steadied as she showed the girls how to fold paper snowflakes for Christmas decorations. Her voice, typically weak and hesitant, grew stronger as she read them stories from Jack's old childhood books. "Mom, you shouldn't tire yourself," Jack cautioned one evening, returning from work to find Susan teaching the twins how to bake cookies. The kitchen counter was dusted with flour, and the sound of Olivia's laughter mixed with the warm scent of vanilla and cinnamon. Tired, Susan looked up, her cheeks flushed with color. "Jack, for the first time in years, I don't feel tired, I feel." Emma stood beside her at the counter, carefully cutting shapes in the cookie dough, while Olivia sat on a stool, legs swinging as she watched the timer. Dr. Williams, who had treated Susan's depression for years, noticed the change during her monthly checkup. "Your mother's vital signs are stronger," he told Jack privately. "Her blood pressure has stabilized, and she's more alert and engaged than I've seen in a long time. Whatever's happening in your home, it's having a remarkable effect on her health." The most significant transformation occurred during what could have been a crisis. One afternoon, while Jack was at work, Olivia had a panic attack triggered by a car backfiring outside. The sudden noise sent her hiding under the dining room table, trembling and inconsolable. Emma tried to reach her sister, but Olivia had retreated too deeply into her fear. Susan, who had barely walked without assistance for months, moved with surprising agility. She lowered herself to the floor, despite her arthritic knees, and crawled under the table. "Breathe with me, sweetheart," she coaxed gently, demonstrating deep, calming breaths. "You're safe here. No one will hurt you while I'm around." When Jack returned home that evening, he found all three of them still under the table, Susan now teaching the twins a silly song from her own childhood. The walking stick she usually depended on lay forgotten by her chair. "Something extraordinary is happening," Susan confided to Jack late that night after the girls were asleep. "These children. They've given me a purpose again. When I hear them moving around the house, when they ask me questions or need help with something, I feel like the person I used to be before we lost your father." Jack watched in amazement as his mother gradually reduced her depression medication under Dr. Williams' supervision. Her hands grew steadier, her steps more confident. She began tending to her neglected rose garden again, with Emma and Olivia eagerly helping to clear the weeds. The girls followed her around the house like ducklings, absorbing her gentle wisdom and flourishing under her attention. The neighborhood couldn't help but notice the change. Mrs. Wilson, despite her initial suspicions, had to admit that Susan Thompson looked years younger. She was seen more frequently outside, supervising the twins as they played in the front yard, her laugh carrying across the street a sound many neighbors had forgotten existed. 1 month after the twins' arrival, Susan attended church for the first time in 3 years, walking down the aisle with a twin on each side, her head held high. The congregation watched in stunned silence as she took her old familiar pew. Emma and Olivia nestled against her sides as she helped them follow along in the hymnal. It's as if those girls were meant to find us, Susan told Jack one evening, watching the twins doing homework at the dining room table. They've brought life back to this house, and to me. The first legal warning came in the form of a certified letter, arriving exactly 10 days after Emma and Olivia entered the Thompson household. Jack stood at the mailbox, his hands trembling as he read the official notice from the Department of Child Services. The language was cold and bureaucratic, demanding an immediate explanation for his unauthorized custody of 2 minor children. Richard Blake, the hospital administrator, summoned Jack to his office the next morning before his shift. "This is a liability nightmare," Thompson, he said, pacing behind his desk. "You can't just take children home like stray puppies. There are protocols, procedures." The meeting ended with Jack being placed on administrative leave pending investigation, a diplomatic term for suspension that sent whispers racing through the hospital corridors. Officer David Mitchell arrived at the house that afternoon, visibly uncomfortable with his official duty. "Jack, I have to file a report," he explained, notepad in hand. "There are accusations of kidnapping." The word hung heavy in the air between them. Through the living room window, they could see Emma and Olivia helping Susan with her gardening, their small hands carefully patting soil around newly planted flowers. The community's reaction proved swift and harsh. Parents at Riverside Elementary School, where Jack had hoped to enroll the twins, organized a petition against their admission. "We don't know anything about these children's background," Karen Davis argued at a heated PTA meeting. "They could be dangerous, traumatized, or carrying diseases." The cruel irony that such words came from the mouth of someone who had once praised Jack's work with sick children at St. Mary's wasn't lost on him. Margaret Wilson's campaign of whispers evolved into more overt action. Anonymous letters appeared in neighbors' mailboxes, suggesting that Jack's motives weren't pure. What kind of man takes in 2 little girls without proper documentation? And the letters insinuated. Some neighbors who had known Jack his entire life now crossed the street to avoid speaking to him. The situation reached a critical point when Sarah Jenkins, the hospital's social worker and Jack's longtime friend, arrived with devastating news. "They're pushing for emergency removal," she warned, her voice tight with concern. "You need a lawyer, Jack." Now the words emergency removal sent Susan into her first anxiety attack since the twins' arrival, requiring Emma and Olivia to demonstrate the calming breathing techniques she had taught them. Attorney Michael Anderson, a childhood friend of Jack's, agreed to take the case pro bono, but his assessment was grim. "You should have reported finding them immediately," he explained during their first meeting. "Every day you waited makes this more difficult to defend." The legal fees, even with Anderson's generous discount, threatened to drain the modest savings Jack had set aside for Susan's medical care. The church community, once a source of support, became divided. Reverend Andrews found himself mediating heated debates after Sunday services. Some parishioners defended Jack's Christian charity, while others questioned his judgment and morality. The twins, acutely aware of the tension, clung closer to Susan during their rare public appearances. Dr. Rachel Foster from the children's ward risked her own position by testifying about the signs of abuse she observed during the girls' initial medical examination. "These children were seriously neglected," she stated firmly in her official report. Jack Thompson's intervention likely saved their lives. Her support cost her several friendships among the hospital staff, but she remained steadfast. The lowest point came when Child Services announced their intention to separate the twins during the investigation. "We have 2 different foster homes willing to take 1 child each," the caseworker explained mechanically. The news sent Olivia into a severe panic attack, while Emma's reaction was one of quiet, determined resistance. "We won't be separated," she declared, holding her sister's hand. "We promised each other." Jack found himself fighting on multiple fronts against the legal system that threatened to take the girls, against the community that had turned its back on him, and against his own doubts about whether he could protect these children who had come to mean so much to him and Susan. One evening, as he sat at the kitchen table surrounded by legal papers and mounting bills, Emma approached him quietly. "Are they going to make us leave?" she asked, her young voice carrying the weight of too much understanding. Jack pulled her into a tight hug, feeling Olivia join them moments later. "No," he promised, with more conviction than he felt. "We're family now. And families fight for each other." Susan, watching from the doorway, straightened her shoulders with renewed determination. They would need every ounce of strength for the battles that lay ahead. The morning dawned cold and grey when Lisa Morrison's sleek black car screeched to a halt outside the Thompson house. She emerged like a storm, her designer clothes and perfectly styled hair a stark contrast to the disheveled woman who had abandoned her daughters 6 weeks earlier. The transformation was jarring. Sobriety had restored her beauty, but her eyes held a dangerous determination. "Where are my children?" Her voice cut through the quiet street, drawing curtains aside in neighboring houses. Jack, who had been preparing to leave for a meeting with his lawyer, felt his heart stop at the sight of her. Through the living room window, he saw Emma freeze in the middle of her reading lesson with Susan, her small body becoming rigid with fear. Lisa strode up the walkway, her high heels clicking against the concrete like approaching thunder. "I know they're here. The whole town's talking about the nurse who took in twin girls." Behind her, an expensive-looking car pulled up, and a man in a tailored suit emerged. Her lawyer, Jack realized with growing dread. "MS. Morrison." Jack stepped onto the porch, closing the door firmly behind him. "This isn't the way to." "Don't you dare tell me what way to handle this," Lisa interrupted, her voice trembling with barely controlled rage. "You kidnapped my daughters. Do you know I could have you arrested right now?" The lawyer behind her nodded grimly, clutching his leather briefcase. Inside, Susan had gathered Emma and Olivia close, but the girls could still hear every word through the thin walls. Olivia began to shake, while Emma's face set in a familiar mask of protective determination. "Don't let her take us," Olivia whispered, clinging to Susan's sleeve. "I've been through rehab," Lisa announced, her voice carrying down the street where neighbors were now openly watching. 30 days. I'm clean, I'm sober, and I have proof of completion." She thrust a certificate toward Jack. "I have a right to my children." The lawyer stepped forward, his expensive cologne mixing with the crisp morning air. "But, Mr. Thompson, I'm James Wheeler from Wheeler & Associates. We have papers here demanding immediate return of Emma and Olivia Morrison to their legal guardian. If you refuse, we're prepared to file criminal charges." Jack felt the world tilting beneath his feet. They were abandoned, he managed, his voice hoarse. In an alley, during a snowstorm. They were hungry, frightened, injured. "I was sick." Lisa's composure cracked, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I made a terrible mistake, but I'm better now. They're my daughters, my flesh and blood. What gives you the right to keep them from me?" The front door opened behind Jack, and Susan stepped out, her frame straight despite her cane. "The right of having earned their trust," she said quietly, her voice carrying moral authority that made even the lawyer pause. "The right of having held them through nightmares about the things they suffered. The right of love." Lisa's face contorted. "Love? You think 6 weeks of playing house gives you rights to my children? I carried them for 9 months. I raised them for 6 years." "You hurt them for 6 years," Jack corrected, his professional calm finally breaking. "They have scars, MS. Morrison, physical and emotional ones. Emma has cigarette burns on her arms. Olivia can't hear loud voices without panicking. They were malnourished when I found them. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably, but Lisa wasn't deterred. I was sick, she repeated. But I'm their mother. Nothing can change that. She moved toward the door, but Jack blocked her path. If you go in there right now, you'll traumatize them all over again, he warned. Is that what you want? To prove you've changed by forcing them to face their worst fears. Something in his words seemed to reach her. Lisa stopped, her hand frozen in midair. For a moment the polished facade cracked, and Jack saw the pain and desperation underneath. I just want my babies back, she whispered. Then prove you deserve them, Susan said gently. Not with certificates or lawyers, but with actions. Show them you've really changed. The lawyer cleared his throat. Ms. Morrison, perhaps we should approach this through proper channels. We can file for supervised visitation first. No, Lisa's composure shattered completely. They're mine. Mine, her scream echoed down the street, and from inside the house came the sound of breaking glass followed by Olivia's terrified cry. The noise seemed to snap Lisa back to reality. She staggered back, horror spreading across her face as she realized what she'd done. Her carefully constructed image of recovery crumbled as she saw her own fear reflected in Jack's eyes. We'll be in touch through official channels, the lawyer said quickly, taking Lisa's arm. As he led her back to the car, she looked back once, tears streaming down her face. Tell them. Tell them Mummy loves them, she called, her voice breaking. Jack watched the cars drive away, his heart pounding. Inside he could hear Susan's gentle voice calming the twins, but he knew this was only the beginning. The real battle for Emma and Olivia's future had just begun. The courthouse hallway buzzed with tension on the morning of the first custody hearing. Jack sat with Emma and Olivia, their small hands clutching his, while Susan talked quietly with their attorney. The double doors at the end of the corridor suddenly burst open, causing everyone to turn. A tall man in an expensive suit strode purposefully toward them, his presence commanding attention. Your Honor, he called out to Judge Eleanor Matthews, who was just entering her chambers. I need to address the court before these proceedings begin. The man's voice carried authority and desperation in equal measure. Jack instinctively pulled the twins closer as the stranger approached. I'm Robert Davidson, the man announced, his bright blue eyes startlingly similar to the twins scanning the gathered group. I'm Emma and Olivia's biological father. The statement fell like a bomb in the quiet hallway. Susan gasped softly, while the twins looked up at Jack in confusion. Robert produced a thick folder of documents, his hands trembling slightly despite his confident demeanor. I have DNA tests, birth certificates, and hospital records. I only learned of my daughter's existence last week when I saw the local news coverage of this custody battle. Judge Matthews studied him carefully. Mr. Davidson, this is highly irregular. We have a scheduled hearing regarding temporary custody arrangements. Your Honor, I've spent 6 years not knowing I had children, Robert interrupted, his composure cracking. Their mother, Lisa Morrison, never told me she was pregnant. I had a right to know. They had a right to know their father. Emma pressed closer to Jack, while Olivia buried her face in his sleeve. Their reaction didn't go unnoticed by Robert, whose confident facade momentarily. I know I'm a stranger to them, he said softly, but I'm their father. I have resources, a stable home. I can provide everything they need. The judge sighed deeply. Mr. Thompson, Ms. Morrison, would you and your counsel join me in my chambers? Mr. Davidson, you and your attorney as well, she glanced at the twins. Mrs. Thompson, would you mind staying with the girls? Inside the judge's chambers, the tension was palpable. Robert explained how he'd discovered the truth, a chance glimpse of a newspaper article, the familiar features of Lisa Morrison, and 2 little girls who looked just like his mother. I hired private investigators, he said. They confirmed everything within days. Lisa, who had been silent until now, exploded. "You left town. You disappeared without a word. How was I supposed to tell you?" Her carefully maintained composure shattered completely. "You were gone, and I was alone, and pregnant, and scared." Robert's face darkened. "I left for a 2-week business trip. When I came back, you had vanished. No note, no forwarding address. I tried to find you, Lisa. For months the pain of old wounds colored his voice. If I had known." Jack watched the exchange with growing dread. Robert Davidson appeared successful, stable, and genuinely desperate to know his daughters. His claim to the twins was biological, legal, and seemingly sincere. How could Jack compete with that? "Your Honor," Robert turned to the judge, "I know I'm late to this situation, but I want to be part of my daughters' lives. I have a right to know them, and they have a right to know me." He pulled out more papers. "I've already filed for full custody." The judge held up her hand. "Mr. Davidson, while your rights as a biological father are significant, we must consider the emotional well-being of the children. These girls have already experienced severe trauma and displacement." Outside in the hallway, Susan sat with Emma and Olivia, trying to distract them with stories. But the twins were too perceptive, too experienced in adult conflicts that affected their fate. "Is that man really our daddy?" Emma whispered, her young voice carrying years of hurt and uncertainty. When they emerged from the judge's chambers, everything had changed. The simple custody battle between Jack and Lisa had evolved into something far more complex. Robert Davidson wasn't just claiming his parental rights, he was offering the twins a life of privilege, stability, and legitimate family connections. "We'll reconvene in 1 week," Judge Matthews announced. "During this time, Mr. Davidson will undergo psychological evaluation and home study. The girls will remain with Mr. Thompson." For now, she looked at each adult in turn. "I strongly suggest you all consider what's truly best for Emma and Olivia." As they left the courthouse, Robert approached the twins carefully. "Hello, Emma, Olivia," he said softly, kneeling to their level. "I know this is scary and confusing, but I want you to know I would have been there if I'd known about you. I would have loved you from the very beginning." The girls said nothing, pressing closer to Jack, but their eyes studied Robert's face with unmistakable curiosity. In that moment, Jack realized the battle for the twins had just become infinitely more complicated. How could he compete with the pull of biological connection, with the allure of a father's love they'd never known? The morning after Robert Davidson's appearance at court, Jack arrived at St. Mary's Hospital to find Richard Blake, the hospital administrator, waiting at the nurse's station. The older man's grim expression and the presence of 2 security guards told Jack everything before a word was spoken. "Thompson, my office." Now Blake's voice carried down the quiet hospital corridor. Staff members quickly found reasons to look busy, but their furtive glances followed Jack as he walked the familiar path to the administration wing. The click of the office door closing behind him sounded like a prison gate. "Sit down." Jack Blake settled behind his desk, pulling out a thick folder. "We've received some disturbing information about your situation with those children." He opened the folder, revealing newspaper clippings, legal documents, and what appeared to be anonymous complaint letters. "The hospital board is deeply concerned," Blake continued, his voice carrying rehearsed regret. "We have a responsibility to our patients, our staff, and our reputation. Having a pediatric nurse involved in a custody battle with accusations of kidnapping, it's untenable." "I didn't kidnap anyone," Jack protested, his voice tight. "Those girls were abandoned. They needed help. As a healthcare professional, I had a duty." "As a healthcare professional," Blake cut in sharply, "you had a duty to report finding abandoned minors to the proper authorities immediately. Instead, you took them home. Created this situation." He shuffled through the papers. "And now we learn their biological father is Robert Davidson. Yes, that Robert Davidson of Davidson Pharmaceuticals. One of our major suppliers." Jack felt the blood drain from his face. Davidson Pharmaceuticals supplied critical medications to St. Mary's at preferential rates. The implications were clear. The hospital couldn't risk antagonizing such an important business partner. "Effective immediately, you're suspended pending investigation," Blake announced, sliding a document across the desk. "With pay for now." But Jack, he leaned forward, lowering his voice. "This isn't just about hospital policy. Davidson's lawyers have been making calls. They're suggesting your judgment might be compromised." "Compromised?" Jack's voice cracked. "I've worked in this pediatric ward for 15 years. My record is spotless. You know me, Richard. You know I would never." "What I know," Blake interrupted, "is that a respected nurse with an aging, ill mother suddenly takes in 2 strange children without proper documentation or procedure. It raises questions about your emotional stability, your decision-making capabilities." The unfairness of it hit Jack like a physical blow. Every child he'd helped over the years, every night shift covered, every extra hour volunteered, none of it seemed to matter now. "My patients need me," he said quietly. "There are kids here who trust me, who—" "Your cases will be reassigned." Blake's tone was final. "Security will escort you to clear out your locker. Your badge and access cards, please." As Jack removed his hospital ID, his fingers brushed against the small photo tucked inside Emma and Olivia helping Susan in the garden, their faces bright with laughter. The image steadied him, reminded him what he was fighting for. The walk to the locker room felt endless. Colleagues watched in shocked silence as he emptied 15 years of his life into a cardboard box. Family photos, thank you cards from patients, his spare scrubs. Dr. Rachel Foster, his longtime friend from pediatrics, tried to approach but was warned back by the hovering security guards. "This isn't right," she called after him. "We all know this isn't right." Her voice echoed in the corridor, followed by Blake's sharp command for her to return to her duties. Outside, the January wind cut through Jack's light jacket. He'd left his heavy coat in his locker, now seemingly locked away forever. The box felt impossibly heavy in his arms, weighted with more than just physical items. How would he tell Susan? How would he explain to the twins that he'd lost the job he loved, the career he'd built? The mortgage payment, Susan's medical bills, the mounting legal fees, it all spun through his mind in a dizzying spiral. As he reached his car, Jack noticed Dr. Foster running across the parking lot. "Jack, wait!" She pressed a business card into his hand. "My brother's a civil rights attorney. Call him. What they're doing, it's discrimination. It's wrong." Jack stared at the card, emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "Rachel, I can't afford." "He'll take it pro bono," she insisted. "We're not letting them do this to you. Not after everything you've done for this hospital, for those kids." Driving home, Jack passed the small park where he'd taken Emma and Olivia last weekend. The sight of the empty swings, gently moving in the winter wind, brought unexpected tears to his eyes. He'd lost his job, his professional reputation was in tatters, and one of the city's most powerful businessmen wanted to take away the children he'd grown to love as his own. But as he pulled into his driveway and saw the twins' faces appear at the window, their small hands waving in welcome, Jack knew one thing with absolute certainty: no matter what it cost him, he would not give up this fight. The county courthouse loomed over them like a stone giant on the morning of the first custody hearing. Jack straightened his borrowed tie alone from his lawyer, Michael Anderson, who had insisted appearances mattered. Inside his chest, his heart hammered against his ribs as he watched Emma and Olivia clutch Susan's hands, their matching blue dresses making them look even more vulnerable. The courtroom's wooden doors swung open with an ominous creak. On one side sat Lisa Morrison, newly polished and professional, her rehabilitation certificates prominently displayed before her. On the other, Robert Davidson commanded attention in his tailored suit, a team of corporate lawyers flanking him like an expensive army. Jack and his family took their place in the middle, feeling like swimmers caught between 2 hungry sharks. Judge Eleanor Matthews studied the assembled parties over her reading glasses. "Before we begin," she announced, her voice carrying authority earned through decades on the bench, I want to remind everyone that this hearing's sole purpose is to determine what's best for Emma and Olivia Morrison Davidson. The proceedings began with Lisa's testimony. She approached the witness stand with practiced grace, tears glistening perfectly in her eyes. "I've made terrible mistakes," she admitted, her voice trembling. "But I've changed. 30 days in rehabilitation showed me what truly matters my children." She detailed her new life: a stable job, a support group, a therapist, and a 2-bedroom apartment waiting for her daughters. Robert Davidson's testimony came next. His corporate confidence somewhat softened when speaking about the twins. "I never knew," he insisted, his voice catching. "If I had known I had daughters, nothing would have kept me from them." He presented plans for the girls' future private schools, trust funds, summer homes, and the best medical care money could buy. Then came the expert witnesses. Child psychologists presented conflicting testimonies about attachment and biological bonds. Social workers debated the importance of stability versus family reunification. Through it all, Emma and Olivia sat silent, their small hands intertwined, watching the adults argue over their fate. When Jack finally took the stand, he felt stripped bare under the fluorescent lights. "I didn't plan this," he began honestly. "I found 2 terrified children in an alley on Christmas Eve. They were hungry, cold, and injured." His voice strengthened as he continued. "But sometimes family isn't about blood or legal documents. It's about love, trust, and showing up every day." The cross-examination was brutal. Robert's lawyers questioned Jack's mental state, suggesting his mother's illness had left him desperately seeking family connections. Lisa's attorney implied dark motives behind a single man taking in young girls. Each accusation felt like a physical blow, but Jack held firm, his eyes occasionally meeting the twins' worried gazes. The most powerful testimony came unexpectedly from Susan. Despite her frail appearance, her voice carried the weight of both professional knowledge and maternal love. As a former child psychologist, she began, causing a stir in the courtroom. Few had known of her previous career. "I can speak to the developmental impact of trauma and attachment. But as someone who has held these girls through their nightmares, I can tell you what they need most: consistency, safety, and unconditional love." During a brief recess, Jack found Emma and Olivia in the courthouse hallway, huddled together on a wooden bench. "Are they going to take us away?" Olivia whispered, her voice small with fear. Before Jack could answer, Emma spoke up with fierce determination. "We won't let them. We're family now." The afternoon session brought surprise testimony from Mrs. Anderson, the twins' first-grade teacher. She described the girls' transformation since living with the Thompsons, from withdrawn and fearful to gradually engaging in class, their homework now completed, their lunches no longer empty. Robert's lawyers countered with experts talking about the importance of father-child relationships and the advantages of financial security. Lisa's team emphasized the sacred bond between mother and child and the power of redemption. Jack's single lawyer seemed overwhelmed by the opposing legal forces, but he had one advantage: the truth in its simplest form. As the first day of hearings drew to a close, Judge Matthews called Emma and Olivia into her chambers for a private conversation. The wait seemed endless. When they emerged, the twins' eyes were red from crying, but they walked with surprising dignity for 6-year-olds who carried such heavy burdens. "We will reconvene tomorrow," Judge Matthews announced. "I remind all parties that this court's priority is the children's well-being, not adult desires or legal technicalities." Our eyes swept the room, lingering on each adult in turn. "I suggest everyone reflect tonight on what that truly means." Outside the courthouse, as winter darkness fell early, Jack watched Emma and Olivia walking ahead with Susan, their matching blue dresses now slightly rumpled, their blonde heads close together in private conversation. Behind him, he could hear Lisa's muffled sobs and Robert's quiet conference with his lawyers. The battle lines had been drawn, but Jack realized with sudden clarity that winning wasn't about defeating the others. It was about protecting the fragile trust those 2 little girls had placed in him. It began with a bruise, an innocent-looking purple mark on Emma's knee that refused to heal. Jack noticed it one morning while helping the twins get ready for school, his nurse's training immediately setting off warning bells. More bruises appeared over the next few days, accompanied by increasing fatigue that even Emma's determined spirit couldn't hide. "I'm just tired," Emma insisted, but her normally rosy cheeks had grown pale, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. When she nearly fainted during breakfast, Jack knew they couldn't wait any longer. The emergency room at St. Mary's, the hospital that had recently suspended him, was their only option. Dr. Rachel Foster was on duty when they arrived. Despite the professional risks, she immediately took charge of Emma's case. "We need blood work," she ordered, her eyes meeting Jack's with worry. She'd seen these symptoms before in her years of pediatric practice. They both had. Olivia refused to leave her twin's side during the blood draw, holding Emma's hand and whispering encouragement. Susan sat in the corner of the examination room, her rosary beads clicking softly as she prayed. The waiting seemed endless. When the results came back, Rachel's face confirmed Jack's worst fears. "The preliminary tests show severe abnormalities in Emma's blood cells," she explained gently. "We need to do more specific testing, but—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "We need to admit her immediately." The next 24 hours passed in a blur of tests, specialists, and mounting fear. The diagnosis, when it came, hit like a physical blow: acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Emma, ever the protector, asked only one question: "Can Olivia stay with me?" The custody battle suddenly seemed trivial compared to this new fight. Judge Matthews, informed of the medical emergency, suspended the hearings indefinitely. Robert Davidson's money and influence proved immediately useful, securing appointments with top specialists and ensuring Emma had a private room. Lisa arrived at the hospital in tears, all pretense of polish abandoned. "My baby," she sobbed, reaching for Emma. But it was Jack that Emma turned to, burying her face in his shirt as the doctors explained the treatment protocol. The medical team's recommendation was clear: Emma needed a bone marrow transplant. Siblings, particularly identical twins, often provided the best match. Olivia immediately volunteered, her small voice steady with determination. "I can save her. I'm her sister." But the testing revealed a cruel twist: Olivia wasn't a match. The medical impossibility of identical twins not matching led to another stunning revelation: the girls weren't identical twins at all. They were fraternal twins who just happened to look remarkably similar. "We need to test the biological parents," Dr. Foster explained. Lisa and Robert underwent immediate testing. The hospital corridors filled with tension as they waited for results. Hours stretched into days as Emma grew weaker, her normally bright spirit dulled by pain and medication. Olivia refused to leave the hospital, sleeping on a cot beside Emma's bed. The sisters would whisper together late into the night, their bond seemingly strengthened by the crisis. Jack often overheard fragments of their conversations: promises to stay together, plans for future adventures, fierce declarations of love. When the test results finally came back, they brought both hope and complication. Lisa was a partial match, enough to be a donor, but not ideal. The procedure would be risky for both mother and daughter. Robert, unfortunately, wasn't a match at all. Lisa didn't hesitate. "I'll do it," she declared, her voice firm. "I brought them into this world. If I can save her now," she trailed off, tears streaming down her face. For the first time, Jack saw past her polished exterior to the mother who, despite her failures, truly loved her children. The preparation for the transplant was grueling. Emma endured rounds of chemotherapy that left her thin and exhausted. Lisa underwent multiple procedures to prepare for the donation. Both mother and daughter faced significant risks, but neither complained. One night, as Jack sat beside Emma's hospital bed, she reached for his hand. "Jack," she whispered, her voice weak but determined, "if something happens, promise you'll take care of Olivia." The simple request broke his heart. "And Mom too," she added, referring to Lisa. She's trying so hard to be better." Susan spent hours reading to both girls, her own health seemingly strengthened by the need to support her grandchildren. Robert Davidson used his connections to ensure Emma had access to experimental treatments if needed. The custody battle that had divided them now seemed to unite them in a shared mission saving Emma. Dr. Foster, risking her position once again, worked tirelessly to coordinate Emma's care. Sometimes she told Jack quietly, "Crisis shows us what really matters." She glanced at the unusual family gathered in and around Emma's hospital room: biological parents, chosen parents, and a twin sister, all united in love and fear. The night before the scheduled transplant, Emma developed a high fever. The medical team rushed to stabilize her condition, while the family held their collective breath. In the midst of the crisis, Olivia climbed into her sister's bed, wrapping her arms around Emma. "You have to stay," she whispered fiercely. "You're my other half." As dawn broke over the hospital, Emma's fever finally broke. The transplant would proceed as planned. Standing in the corridor, watching Lisa being prepared for the procedure that might save her daughter's life, Jack realized that sometimes the greatest acts of love come from the most unexpected sources. As Emma's illness became public knowledge, the small community around Maple Street erupted into a storm of conflicting reactions. The story had all the elements that stirred people's hearts and opinions: a custody battle, a life-threatening illness, and a complex web of family relationships that defied simple categorization. Margaret Wilson, who had once led the campaign against Jack, found herself in an unexpected position when her own granddaughter was diagnosed with leukemia. Standing in the hospital corridor one evening, she watched Jack comforting Olivia outside Emma's room. The sight of the child's absolute trust in him challenged everything she had assumed about the situation. The local newspaper ran a front-page story titled "Love versus Blood: A Family's Fight for Life." The article detailed the custody battle, Emma's diagnosis, and Lisa's decision to donate bone marrow. Letters to the editor poured in, dividing the community further. Some praised Jack's dedication and questioned why the custody battle should continue. Others argued that blood ties were paramount, especially given Robert Davidson's financial resources for medical care. At Riverside Elementary School, parents who had once signed petitions against the twins' admission now organized meal trains and fundraisers. Karen Davis, the PTA president who had been one of Jack's vocal critics, personally delivered a check from the school community to help with medical expenses. "I was wrong about you," she admitted quietly. Sometimes the right family isn't the obvious one. The church congregation split into factions. Some members, led by elderly Mrs. Henderson, maintained that the girls belonged with their biological parents. "It's God's natural order," she insisted during prayer meetings. But Reverend Andrews countered with sermons about Joseph, who raised a child not his own, and the many forms God's love could take. Local businesses took sides as well. The owner of Miller's Pharmacy refused to fill prescriptions for the Thompson family, citing moral concerns. In response, the competing Davidson drugstore not only welcomed their business but offered a substantial discount on all medical supplies. The irony of Robert Davidson's company inadvertently supporting Jack wasn't lost on anyone. Social media exploded with opinions from people who had never met any of the parties involved. Hashtags supporting different sides trended locally. Teen Jack competed with Blood is Thicker, while others promoted Sevema and Family Slav. The public attention brought both support and additional stress to all involved. Dr. Rachel Foster faced professional consequences for her continued support of Jack and the twins. Anonymous complaints were filed questioning her objectivity. The hospital board called her in for a review. "If standing up for what's right costs me my job," she told them defiantly, "then perhaps I don't want to work in a place that puts politics above patient care." The neighborhood itself became a battleground of yard signs and ribbons. Orange ribbons for leukemia awareness appeared alongside blue ribbons supporting Jack and the twins. Some houses displayed both, refusing to see the situation as an either-or choice. The Thompsons' immediate neighbors, who had once avoided them, now took turns bringing food and offering to help with household chores. Sarah Jenkins, the social worker initially assigned to investigate Jack, made a public statement supporting his custody claim. "In my 20 years of child services work," she wrote in an official letter to the judge, "I have never seen children thrive so completely in a non-biological family setting." Her stance cost her several friendships, but earned her the respect of many colleagues. Local businesses began taking sides more openly. The coffee shop, where Susan used to work before her illness, offered free beverages to anyone wearing a Team Jack button. The upscale restaurant owned by Robert Davidson's friend refused to serve Jack when he tried to pick up takeout for the family. Each incident fueled more debate and division. A group of hospital nurses, despite the administration's warnings, organized a silent protest against Jack's suspension. They wore orange and blue ribbons on their uniforms and left his locker untouched, a silent testament to their missing colleague. The administration's attempts to remove these subtle signs of support only strengthened their resolve. Even the local police found themselves drawn into the controversy. Officer David Mitchell, who had initially investigated the allegations against Jack, spoke up at a community meeting. "I've seen real child endangerment," he stated firmly. "What I've witnessed in the Thompson home is the opposite, it's child salvation." The situation reached a crescendo when anonymous donors began sending checks to help with Emma's medical expenses. Some supported Jack, others Robert, and still others simply wanted to help the child regardless of the custody outcome. The local bank had to assign a special clerk just to handle the donations and ensure they reached their intended recipients. Through it all, the Thompson house remained a quiet island in the storm of public opinion. Jack focused on Emma's treatment and Olivia's emotional well-being, while Susan's strength seemed to grow with each new challenge. They accepted help graciously but refused to engage in the public debate, understanding that the real battle wasn't for public opinion, it was for Emma's life and the family's future. The final custody hearing commenced on a stormy morning in March, 3 weeks after Emma's successful bone marrow transplant. The courtroom buzzed with tension as all parties assembled for what promised to be an emotional showdown. Judge Eleanor Matthews, her face grave, surveyed the packed gallery where community members sat divided like opposing armies, their orange and blue ribbons marking their allegiances. "Before we begin," Judge Matthews announced, her voice cutting through the murmurs, "I want to remind everyone that this is not a sporting event. We are here to determine the future of 2 young girls who have already endured more trauma than most adults." Her stern gaze swept the room, silencing the whispers. The proceedings began with Robert Davidson's testimony. Impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Jack's monthly salary, he presented his case with corporate precision. "I can provide them with everything," he stated, gesturing to elaborate plans projected on a screen. The finest schools, medical care, summer homes, trust funds, advantages most people can only dream of giving their children. Under cross-examination, however, Robert's polished facade began to crack. Jack's lawyer, Michael Anderson, pressed him about his past. "Mr. Davidson, in the 6 years before you learned about your daughters, how many other children did you father and abandon?" The question sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Robert's face reddened. "Objection," his lawyer shouted, but the damage was done. The revelation of 3 other unacknowledged children in 2 different states cast a shadow over his claims of paternal devotion. Lisa Morrison's testimony came next, her appearance markedly different from her previous courtroom visits. Gone was the designer clothing and perfect makeup, replaced by a simple dress and the pallor of someone still recovering from a medical procedure. She spoke softly about her journey through rehabilitation, her decision to donate bone marrow, and her hopes for redemption. "I know I can't erase my mistakes," she admitted, tears flowing freely. "But I gave Emma life twice now, at birth and through the transplant. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just a chance to prove I can be the mother they deserve." The courtroom fell silent when Susan Thompson took the stand, her frail appearance belying her inner strength. She spoke of the nights spent comforting the twins, of watching them slowly learn to trust, of the joy they brought to her life. "These girls taught me how to live again," she testified, her voice clear despite her weakness, "and in return we gave them what they needed most: consistency, safety, and unconditional love." The most dramatic moment came during Jack's testimony. He had just begun describing the night he found the twins when Lisa's new boyfriend burst into the courtroom, waving papers and shouting about a conspiracy. Security rushed to restrain him, but not before he knocked over the evidence table, sending documents flying. In the chaos, Emma's medical records scattered across the floor, revealing years of documented abuse that Lisa's lawyers had managed to keep sealed. Judge Matthews called for order, but the damage was done. The records painted a devastating picture: cigarette burns, suspicious fractures, malnutrition, a pattern of abuse that stretched back years. Lisa collapsed in tears, while Robert Davidson sat stone-faced, his expensive lawyers shuffling papers nervously. Dr. Rachel Foster testified next, risking her career to speak about Emma's medical crisis. "I've seen many families in crisis," she stated firmly. "What I witnessed in that hospital room was extraordinary." Jack Thompson, despite being suspended from his job and embroiled in this custody battle, never left Emma's side. He coordinated her care, comforted Olivia, and even supported Lisa through the transplant process. The courtroom held its breath when Emma and Olivia were called to speak. The twins entered hand in hand, their matching blue dresses and recently trimmed hair making them look younger than their 7 years. Judge Matthews spoke to them privately in her chambers, but their voices carried clearly through the door. "We love our mom and dad," Emma's voice wavered, "but Jack and Susan are our family too. They saved us. Not just when Jack found us, but every day since then." Olivia's quieter voice followed. "When Emma was sick, everyone fought over us like we were toys. But Jack and Susan just loved us. They didn't ask for anything back." The judge's decision to hear closing arguments immediately sent lawyers scrambling to revise their prepared statements. Robert's legal team emphasized wealth and opportunities. Lisa's lawyer spoke of maternal bonds and second chances. But it was Michael Anderson's simple closing that hushed the courtroom. "Your Honor," he began, standing beside Jack, "we've heard a lot about what money can buy and what blood relations mean. But family isn't about DNA or trust funds. It's about who shows up every day, who puts the children's needs first, who creates a home where love isn't conditional on performance or perfection. The Thompsons have done that, not for reward or recognition, but because that's what real parents do." As the hearing concluded, Judge Matthews announced she would need time to consider her decision. The parties filed out under the heavy weight of uncertainty, knowing that the next time they gathered, the futures of 2 little girls would be decided forever. The evening before the judge's final decision, Lisa Morrison sat alone in her small apartment, surrounded by photographs of Emma and Olivia spread across her coffee table. Each image told a story of moments missed, happiness lost, trust broken. Her fingers traced the edges of a school photo taken before everything fell apart, 2 smiling faces that had once looked at her with unconditional love, before the alcohol and abuse destroyed everything. The bone marrow donation had changed something in Lisa. Perhaps it was the physical act of giving part of herself to save her daughter, or maybe it was the long hours in the hospital watching Jack and Susan care for Emma with a devotion she had never managed to achieve. Whatever the cause, the experience had stripped away her carefully constructed facade of reformation, leaving raw truth in its place. At 3 in the morning, she made a call to her lawyer. "I need to speak to Judge Matthews before she announces her decision," she insisted, her voice hoarse but determined. "It can't wait until morning." The lawyer protested, but something in Lisa's tone made him relent. Judge Matthews agreed to meet them in her chambers at dawn. Lisa arrived looking nothing like the polished woman who had first demanded her children back. Her hands shook as she placed a thick envelope on the judge's desk. "I'm withdrawing my custody claim," she announced, her voice barely above a whisper. The judge and lawyer stared at her in shock, But more than that, I want to make a statement to the court about Jack Thompson and my children." Inside the envelope was a detailed confession, every incident of abuse, every moment of neglect, every time she had chosen alcohol over her daughter's well-being. But more importantly, it contained something else, a clear-eyed assessment of what she had witnessed since Emma's illness. "I watched them," Lisa explained, tears streaming down her face. "I watched how Emma reaches for Jack when she's scared, how Olivia looks to Susan for comfort. I saw what real parenting looks like, and it made me realize what I never gave them." Her voice broke. "They deserve better than what I can offer, even now." The judge leaned forward. "Ms. Morrison, are you certain about this? You've made significant progress in your recovery. The bone marrow donation." "It was the least I could do," Lisa interrupted. "But it doesn't make me a mother. Not the kind they need." She pulled out more papers from her bag. "I want to voluntarily terminate my parental rights, but with conditions. I'm asking the court to grant full custody to Jack and Susan Thompson." Her lawyer started to object, but Lisa silenced him with a look. "I've watched Jack work extra shifts to pay for Emma's medical bills, even after losing his job. I've seen Susan push through her own illness to be there for my girls. They love my daughters not because they have to, but because they choose to." Lisa's hands trembled as she continued. "But I'm asking for one thing: supervised visitation rights. Not because I deserve them, but because Emma and Olivia deserve to know that their biological mother loved them enough to put their happiness above her own desires." The judge studied Lisa carefully. "What about Mr. Davidson's claim?" Lisa's laugh was bitter. "Robert wants trophies, not daughters. He sees them as extensions of his empire, not as the beautiful, scared, brave little girls they are." She pulled out one final document. "Did you know he offered me money to support his custody claim? He thought he could buy my cooperation like he buys everything else." The morning sun was streaming through the chamber windows as Lisa made her final plea. "I gave birth to them, but Jack and Susan gave them a home. They gave them stability, safety, and the kind of love I should have offered but didn't know how." She wiped her eyes. Sometimes being a good mother means knowing when to step aside. But Judge Matthews sat silently for a long moment, studying the documents before her. Finally she spoke. "Ms. Morrison, this is perhaps the most selfless act one witnessed in my years on the bench. Are you absolutely certain?" Lisa stood straighter, finding strength in her decision. "For the first time in my life, I'm thinking about what's best for my daughters instead of what I want. Yes, I'm certain." As she left the courthouse, Lisa paused to watch the sunrise. The weight of addiction and guilt still pressed on her shoulders, but something else was there too, the beginning of peace, born from finally putting her children's needs first. The final day of hearings began with an unexpected turn when Robert Davidson requested to address the court. His team of lawyers shifted nervously as he approached the stand, their whispered objections falling on deaf ears. The normally immaculate businessman looked troubled, his expensive suit slightly rumpled from a sleepless night. "Your Honor," he began, his voice lacking its usual corporate polish, "I need to tell the truth about my involvement in this case." The courtroom fell silent, the tension palpable. Judge Matthews nodded for him to continue, her experienced eyes noting his uncharacteristic demeanor. "When I first learned about Emma and Olivia, I saw an opportunity," Robert admitted, avoiding the twins' gaze. Davidson Pharmaceuticals was facing public relations issues. The story of a successful CEO fighting for his long-lost daughters, it was perfect publicity. A murmur of shock rippled through the gallery. His composure cracked further as he continued. "I had my team investigate Lisa Morrison immediately after seeing the news story. They found evidence of her pregnancy, of my paternity, within days. But they also found something else." He pulled out a worn envelope from his jacket pocket. "They found letters, dozens of them, that Lisa had sent to my office over the years, trying to contact me about the girls." The revelation hit the courtroom like a thunderbolt. Robert's voice shook as he explained. "My assistant was instructed to block all personal correspondence. It was company policy. Those letters never reached me, but they existed. Lisa tried to tell me about my daughters, and my own corporate machinery prevented it. Judge Matthews leaned forward. "Mr. Davidson, are you saying you had the opportunity to know about your children years ago?" "Yes, Your Honor. But that's not the worst part." Robert straightened his shoulders, finally looking at Emma and Olivia. "The truth is, even if those letters had reached me, I wouldn't have wanted to know. I was building an empire. Children didn't fit into that plan." He described how his legal team had orchestrated the custody battle, hiring investigators to dig up dirt on Jack, pressuring the hospital to suspend him, even attempting to bribe Lisa. "We thought we could win through sheer force of resources," he admitted. But then Emma got sick. Robert's voice broke as he recalled the hospital nights during Emma's treatment. "I watched Jack Thompson sit by my daughter's bedside for hours, exhausted after working manual labor jobs because I'd gotten him suspended. I saw Susan Thompson reading stories to Olivia. Despite her own health issues, I witnessed Lisa facing her demons and risking her own health to save our daughter." "And what did I do?" he asked rhetorically. "I wrote checks. I made phone calls. I treated it like a business problem to be solved with money and influence." Tears now flowed freely down his face. "I watched real parents in action, and I realized I'm not one. I'm just a man with a guilty conscience and a bank account." Robert then revealed his own history of abandoned children, 3 others in different states, all supported financially but emotionally neglected. "I've been trying to buy my way out of responsibility my entire life," he confessed. "These girls deserve better than that. They deserve the love and stability they've found with the Thompsons." Standing up, Robert addressed Jack directly. "Mr. Thompson, I apologize for everything my legal team has put you through. I'm withdrawing my custody claim." He turned to Judge Matthews. "But I would like to request one thing: the opportunity to establish a relationship with my daughters over time, at their pace and comfort level, under the Thompsons' guidance." The silence in the courtroom was absolute as Robert made his final statement. "Your Honor, I came into this thinking I could prove I was the best father for Emma and Olivia by showing what I could give them. Instead, I learned that being a parent isn't about providing things, it's about providing yourself, your time, your heart. Jack and Susan Thompson have done that from day one, asking nothing in return." But as Robert stepped down from the witness stand, he paused beside the twins. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I hope someday you'll give me the chance to know you, but I understand if that takes time." Emma and Olivia looked up at him with a mixture of confusion and cautious hope, their hands clasped together as always. Judge Matthews called a brief recess, but the outcome seemed clear to everyone present. Sometimes the greatest victory comes not from winning a fight, but from having the courage to acknowledge when someone else deserves to win. The celebration following Robert's withdrawal of his custody claim was cut brutally short. Just hours after leaving the courthouse, Emma collapsed during dinner, her small body racked with fever. The bone marrow transplant that had seemed so successful was showing signs of rejection. Dr. Rachel Foster met them at the emergency room entrance, her face tight with concern. "Her white blood cell count is dropping dramatically," she explained as Emma was rushed to isolation. "Her body is fighting the transplanted cells." The sterile hospital room that had become so familiar during the initial treatment now felt like a prison, its walls closing in as Emma's condition deteriorated. Olivia refused to leave her sister's side, pressing her hand against the isolation room's glass barrier. "You promised," she whispered, her breath fogging the surface. "You promised we'd stay together." Inside, Emma lay pale and still, connected to a maze of tubes and monitors, her golden hair now completely gone from the renewed chemotherapy. Jack found himself living in a nightmare of déjà vu. Once again, he watched helplessly as someone he loved fought for life. The memory of his father's final days in this same hospital haunted him as he monitored Emma's vital signs, his nursing training both a blessing and a curse, as he understood exactly how serious her condition was becoming. Susan's health began to suffer from the stress, but she refused to stay home. "My granddaughter needs me," she insisted, taking up residence in the uncomfortable hospital chair beside Emma's bed. She read stories continuously, her voice growing hoarse but never stopping, as if her words could tether Emma to life. Lisa, still recovering from the bone marrow donation, received the news in her small apartment. Despite her weakness, she rushed to the hospital. "Take more," she begged the doctors. "Take whatever you need from me. Just save her." But medicine had its limits, and her previous sacrifice had left her too weak for another donation. Robert Davidson's money proved useful once again, flying in specialists from around the country. But even the most expensive treatments seemed powerless against Emma's failing immune system. The doctors spoke in increasingly grave tones about options and quality-of-life decisions. The worst moment came when Emma, in a brief period of consciousness, called Jack to her bedside. "I'm tired," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the beeping monitors. So tired the words echoed his father's final conversation, and Jack felt his heart shattering all over again. Olivia developed a fever of her own, though tests showed nothing physically wrong. Its sympathetic Dr. Foster explained gently. Twins, especially ones as close as Emma and Olivia, sometimes experience physical manifestations of each other's illnesses. The bond that had helped them survive years of abuse now seemed to be pulling them both toward darkness. As Emma's condition continued to decline, the hospital staff witnessed something extraordinary. Her room became a convergence point for 4 different kinds of love: Jack's fierce, protective devotion, Susan's gentle, nurturing presence, Lisa's desperate, remorseful dedication, and Olivia's unshakable twin bond. Each brought their own kind of healing, but would it be enough? The nights were the worst, filled with the rhythmic hum of machines and the whispered prayers of whoever was keeping vigil. During one particularly dark morning, as dawn struggled to break through the hospital windows, Emma's monitors began their terrifying alarm. The code team rushed in, and Jack found himself pressed against the wall, watching in helpless terror as they fought to stabilize her failing heart. As Emma's condition deteriorated, the hospital administration made a devastating decision. Dr. Blake, the same administrator who had suspended Jack, called a meeting with the family to discuss what he termed necessary precautions. His words fell like hammer blows in the small conference room. "We need to separate Olivia from Emma," he stated, shuffling papers that detailed hospital protocols for infectious disease control. The risk of psychological trauma is too high if he left the sentence unfinished, but its meaning hung heavy in the air. Additionally, Olivia's constant presence could be compromising the sterile environment Emma requires. "No," Olivia's scream echoed through the conference room. "You can't make me leave her," she clung to Jack's arm, her small fingers digging in with desperate strength. The 7-year-old's face showed a determination far beyond her years. But Dr. Rachel Foster immediately opposed the decision. Separating them now could cause severe psychological damage to both girls, she argued, presenting research on twin bonds and emotional support during critical illness. "Olivia's presence is helping Emma fight. We can see it in her vital signs when they're together." But the administration remained firm. Security guards were posted outside Emma's room with strict instructions about visiting hours and approved visitors. Olivia was to be limited to 30 minutes of contact twice a day, always wearing full protective gear that made her look like a small astronaut. The first attempt to enforce the separation was traumatic for everyone involved. Olivia had to be physically carried from Emma's room, her screams echoing down the sterile corridors. "She needs me," she sobbed, reaching back toward her sister's room. Emma inside the isolation room, Emma's monitors began screaming in response to her sister's distress. Susan, despite her frail health, became fierce in her opposition. These children have already endured more separation and trauma than any child, should, she argued, her voice carrying the authority of her years as a child psychologist. Forcing them apart now when Emma is fighting for her life is cruel and potentially dangerous. Lisa and Robert, in a rare moment of unity, both threw their influence behind keeping the twins together. Robert threatened to withdraw his hospital donations, while Lisa spoke to the local media about the administration's inhumane decision. The story quickly gained public attention, with social media hashtags trending "Keep Them Together" and "Twin Rights." Jack found himself fighting against the very institution he had once served faithfully. "I was a nurse here for 15 years, he reminded Dr. Blake. "I know the protocols, but I also know that healing isn't just about medical procedures. It's about the will to live, and Olivia gives Emma that will." The situation reached a crisis point when Olivia fell ill herself. Not with any identifiable disease, but with what the doctors called sympathetic symptoms. Her temperature matched Emma's. She experienced phantom pains that corresponded to her sister's discomfort, and she stopped eating when Emma couldn't keep food down. Dr. Foster documented everything, building a compelling case for the therapeutic value of keeping the twins together. "We're seeing a remarkable physiological connection," she explained to the hospital board. "When Olivia is with Emma, both girls' vital signs stabilize. It's as if they're helping each other heal." The turning point came during one of the enforced separation periods. Emma's heart rate dropped dangerously low, setting off multiple alarms. As the medical team rushed to stabilize her, Olivia broke away from her guardians and ran to her sister's room. The moment she took Emma's hand, the monitors began to stabilize. The medical staff watched in amazement as Emma's vital signs strengthened, simply from her twins' presence. The strain of Emma's illness and the fight to keep the twins together took its toll on Susan Thompson. She had been pushing herself beyond her limits for weeks, spending long hours at the hospital despite her own fragile health. The collapse, when it came, was sudden and frightening. Jack found her slumped in the hospital corridor outside Emma's room, her usually pale face now ashen, her breathing labored. "Mom," his cry brought medical staff running. The cruel irony wasn't lost on anyone. Susan was wheeled into emergency care in the same hospital where her granddaughter fought for life, just 3 floors below. Severe exhaustion complicated by her existing conditions, Dr. Mitchell explained to Jack in the quiet of the ICU waiting room. "Her heart is showing signs of strain. She needs complete rest," but he trailed off, knowing that Susan would never willingly stay away from Emma's bedside. The news hit the twins hard. Emma, already weakened by her own battle, became more withdrawn when told about Susan's condition. Olivia, torn between her sister and the grandmother who had become so precious to them, started having nightmares again. "Everyone leaves," she whispered one night, curled up in a chair between the 2 hospital rooms. "Everyone gets sick and leaves." Jack found himself running between floors, trying to divide his time between his mother and his daughter. The exhaustion showed in his face, in the tremor of his hands as he checked vital signs and adjusted blankets. The hospital staff, many of whom had worked with him before his suspension, pretended not to notice when he fell asleep in chairs or missed visiting hours restrictions. Susan, even in her weakened state, tried to maintain her role as the family's emotional anchor. "Bring the girls to me," she insisted, though speaking left her breathless. "They need to see I'm still here." The brief visits became precious moments of normalcy in the sterile hospital environment, with Susan telling stories from her hospital bed just as she had done at home. The situation reached a critical point when Susan's heart showed signs of arrhythmia. The doctors wanted to transfer her to a specialized cardiac unit in another hospital. "No," she stated firmly, despite her weakness. "I won't leave my family when they need me." Her determination worried the medical team, but they recognized the healing power of staying close to loved ones. Robert Davidson, witnessing Susan's decline, offered to hire private nurses and set up a medical suite in the Thompson home. "Let me do this," he pleaded with Jack. "Not for recognition, but because she's the grandmother my daughters deserve." The gesture, coming from a man who had once tried to take the twins away, moved everyone deeply. Lisa, still recovering from her bone marrow donation, began spending time with Susan, reading to her just as Susan had once read to the twins. "You showed me what real motherhood looks like," she told the older woman quietly. "I want to learn from you, if you'll stay with us long enough to teach me." The twins developed their own way of helping. Emma, on her stronger days, would have her bed wheeled into Susan's room. Olivia would sit between them, holding one hand from each, creating a chain of love and healing. The hospital staff, touched by these moments, began coordinating their care to allow these precious family gatherings. Dr. Rachel Foster, observing the complex web of care and concern, made a radical proposal to the hospital board. "What we're seeing here isn't just 3 separate cases," she argued. "This is a family healing together, their recoveries intertwined." Her suggestion to create a specialized family care unit, allowing Susan, Emma, and their family to remain together during treatment, would later become a model for other hospitals. Through it all, Susan's spirit remained unbroken, though her body showed the strain of her dedication. Sometimes she told Jack during a quiet moment, "Love requires everything we have, but it's worth every breath, every heartbeat." Her words would prove prophetic in the days to come, as the family faced their greatest challenges yet. The truth emerged in the most unexpected way during one of Lisa's long vigils at Emma's bedside. She had been talking softly to her sleeping daughter, unaware that Jack was standing just outside the door, when a quiet monologue became a confession that would change everything. "I never told anyone why I started drinking," she whispered, stroking Emma's pale hand. "It wasn't just weakness or parties like everyone thinks. It started the night your grandfather came back." Her voice trembled with long-buried pain. "He found me after years of abandonment, claiming he'd changed, that he wanted to be part of our lives." Jack remained frozen in the doorway as Lisa continued, her words spilling out like poison finally being drawn from a wound. She described a childhood marked by violent abuse, her father's alcoholic rages, her mother's eventual suicide. When her father had reappeared in her life, just months after the twins were born, the old patterns of abuse had resurfaced. "He threatened to take you girls away if I didn't let him stay," Lisa confessed, tears streaming down her face. "Said no court would give custody to a single mother with no support system. I started drinking to numb the fear, to endure his presence. But then the drinking became its own monster, and I turned into him the very thing I feared most." Dr. Rachel Foster, who had quietly joined Jack in the doorway, documented everything. The revelation explained so much: Lisa's paranoid behavior, her violent outbursts, the way she'd alternately cling to the twins and push them away. It wasn't just addiction, it was a complex web of generational trauma and survival mechanisms. When Lisa finally noticed her audience, she didn't stop talking. Instead, she turned to Jack, her eyes clear and desperate. "I never wanted to hurt them," she pleaded. "I thought I was protecting them by keeping them close, but I was just repeating the cycle. My father. He disappeared again after emptying my bank accounts, but by then the damage was done. I was already lost to the bottle." The hospital's psychiatric team was called in, and for the first time, Lisa received a proper diagnosis: complex PTSD layered with addiction, a combination that explained her erratic behavior and struggles with recovery. Her previous rehabilitation had treated the symptoms but never addressed the root cause of her trauma. Social services searched for Lisa's father, discovering a trail of similar victims across multiple states. Other families he had infiltrated, other daughters he had terrorized, other grandchildren he had used as leverage. The pattern was clear and heartbreaking. Emma, drifting in and out of consciousness, heard portions of her mother's confession. One afternoon, she managed to speak about it. "Is that why you used to lock our bedroom door at night, Mom?" she asked quietly. "Were you trying to keep him out?" Lisa broke down completely, gathering Emma's fragile form in her arms as carefully as she could manage. "I'm so sorry, baby. I thought I was strong enough to protect you, but I couldn't even protect myself. I became the monster instead. Jack, watching this exchange, felt his perspective on Lisa shifting dramatically. The woman he had seen as simply an abusive mother was revealed to be a victim herself, trapped in a cycle of trauma she hadn't known how to break. It didn't excuse her actions, but it provided context that changed everything. Judge Eleanor Matthews called for an unusual private meeting in her chambers during Emma's recovery period. Present were Jack, Susan in a wheelchair, Lisa, and Robert Davidson. The tension in the room was palpable as the judge removed her reading glasses and picked up a silver-framed photograph from her desk. "Before I make my final ruling," she began, her usual judicial formality softening. "I need to share something personal." She turned the frame around, revealing a black and white photograph of a young girl standing between an older couple. "This is me, age 7, with my adoptive parents." The room fell silent as Judge Matthews continued. "I was rescued from an abusive home by a nurse, much like Mr. Thompson, who found me hiding in a hospital bathroom during her shift." Her fingers traced the photograph's edge. "She could have simply called social services, followed protocol. Instead, she took me home to her parents, who eventually adopted me." The parallel to the twins' situation wasn't lost on anyone. The judge's voice grew thick with emotion as she described her biological mother's battle with addiction, her father's disappearance, and the years of healing it took to overcome her early trauma. "My adoptive parents weren't wealthy," she explained. "They weren't even particularly well educated. But they had something more valuable. They had love, patience, and unwavering commitment." She turned to Lisa, her expression gentle but firm. "Ms. Morrison, your recent revelations about your own abuse have deeply affected this court. The cycle of trauma you described is all too familiar to me." Lisa wiped tears from her cheeks as the judge continued. "But breaking that cycle requires more than just understanding it. It requires creating a completely new pattern." Looking at Robert Davidson, she added, "And Mr. Davidson, financial security, while important, cannot replace emotional stability. My adoptive father was a janitor, but he never missed a single one of my school plays." The judge then addressed Jack directly. "Mr. Thompson, when you found those girls in that alley, you did exactly what my nurse did 35 years ago. You followed your heart instead of protocol. Sometimes that's exactly what justice requires." Standing, Judge Matthews walked to her window, looking out over the city. "The law typically favors biological parents, and for good reason. But my own experience has taught me that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about who steps up when stepping up is hardest." She revealed that her own adoption had inspired her career choice, her determination to ensure other children found their way to loving homes, regardless of biological connections. "My biological mother fought the adoption initially," she shared. "Years later, she thanked my adoptive parents for giving me what she couldn't at the time." Turning back to face them, Judge Matthews's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "This case has challenged every principle of family law, every precedent about parental rights. But it has also demonstrated something remarkable: the capacity for healing across generations." She picked up the photograph again, studying it thoughtfully. "My adoptive parents taught me that love isn't a limited resource. They encouraged me to maintain a relationship with my biological mother once she had healed, understanding that a child's heart has room for many kinds of love." The implications of her personal revelation hung in the air. This wasn't just a judge presiding over a custody case. This was someone who intimately understood the complexity of family bonds, the weight of trauma, and the possibility of healing through unconventional family structures. The transformation in the community's attitude began with Margaret Wilson, the very neighbor who had first raised suspicions about Jack. Standing in the hospital corridor, watching Jack rush between Emma's and Susan's rooms, she suddenly remembered how he had done the same for her husband during his final days at St. Mary's, staying past his shifts to ensure George wasn't alone. That evening, Margaret made her way to the hospital kitchen, where she started organizing a meal rotation for the Thompson family. The sign-up sheet quickly filled with names of neighbors who had once shunned them. Within days, hot meals appeared regularly at the hospital, each dish accompanied by notes of encouragement and apology. The local newspaper, which had once published inflammatory speculation about Jack's motives, ran a powerful feature story titled "The True Meaning of Family." The article detailed not just the custody battle and health crises, but the extraordinary way 4 adults had put aside their differences for the sake of 2 little girls. Karen Davis, the PTA president who had opposed the twins' enrollment at Riverside Elementary, arrived at the hospital with a remarkable proposal. The school board had unanimously voted to create a special education fund in Emma and Olivia's name, ensuring that children from non-traditional families would always have support and acceptance in their community. Even Richard Blake, the hospital administrator who had suspended Jack, found himself reconsidering his actions. During a board meeting, he publicly acknowledged the error in judgment, announcing the creation of a new hospital policy for handling similar situations. Sometimes, he admitted, our rigid adherence to protocol blinds us to basic human compassion. The church congregation, once divided, united in support. Reverend Andrews organized a prayer vigil that brought together both sides of the controversy. The sight of Lisa Morrison and Robert Davidson kneeling in prayer beside Jack and Susan became a powerful symbol of reconciliation. Local businesses that had previously shunned the Thompsons now displayed "We support our community" signs, with portions of their proceeds dedicated to children's medical care. The pharmacy that had refused to fill their prescriptions sent a formal apology, along with a year's worth of medical supplies. Mrs. Anderson, the twins' first-grade teacher, started a letter-writing campaign among her students. Hundreds of handmade cards arrived at the hospital, their childish handwriting expressing simple but profound messages of love and hope. The walls of Emma's room became a rainbow of artwork and encouragement. Officer David Mitchell, who had initially investigated the kidnapping allegations, became a regular visitor. He would arrive in uniform after his shifts, reading adventure stories to the twins and sharing quiet conversations with Jack about the nature of justice versus law. The transformation reached its peak when Margaret Wilson organized a community meeting in the hospital's conference room. Representatives from every faction that had opposed Jack were present, each offering not just apologies but concrete ways to help. The meeting evolved into a blueprint for supporting non-traditional families in their community. Dr. Rachel Foster watched it all with quiet satisfaction, documenting how the reduced stress levels positively affected both Emma's recovery and Susan's health. The community's acceptance proved to be its own form of medicine, healing not just the immediate family but the neighborhood's collective spirit. The final gesture came from the hospital board itself. They not only reinstated Jack's position but created a new role for him, Director of Family-Centered Care, a position that would allow him to help other families navigate similar challenges. The announcement was met with a standing ovation from the hospital staff who had supported him all along. As Emma's condition slowly improved and Susan regained her strength, the community's transformation became complete. What had begun as a controversial custody battle had evolved into a powerful lesson about judgment, compassion, and the true meaning of community support. The courthouse was filled to capacity on the morning of Judge Matthews' final ruling. Emma, now strong enough to attend, sat between Jack and Susan, with Olivia holding her hand tightly. Lisa and Robert Davidson sat nearby, their expensive lawyers conspicuously absent. Judge Matthews entered the courtroom, carrying not just her usual files but also the silver-framed photograph from her chambers. The room fell silent as she took her place, her eyes scanning the faces before her with unusual warmth. "In my 30 years on the bench," she began, "I have never encountered a case that so thoroughly challenges our traditional definitions of family. What began as a seemingly straightforward custody dispute has evolved into something far more profound, a testament to the transformative power of love and the true meaning of parenthood." She detailed her ruling with careful precision. Primary custody would be granted to Jack and Susan Thompson with legal adoption rights. Lisa Morrison would retain supervised visitation rights contingent upon her continued therapy and sobriety. And Robert Davidson would be granted regular visitation privileges, with the opportunity for increased contact as the twins became comfortable. But it was the unusual addendum to a ruling that caught everyone by surprise. This court recognizes that traditional custody arrangements may not serve the best interests of children who have formed deep bonds with multiple parental figures. Therefore, I am establishing what will be known as a family council for Emma and Olivia. The judge explained that all 4 adults would have specific roles and responsibilities in the twins' lives. Jack and Susan would provide the stable home environment and make day-to-day decisions. Lisa would participate in major medical decisions, honoring the profound connection established during Emma's illness. Robert would contribute to educational planning and ensure financial security through a trust fund. More importantly, Judge Matthews continued, this arrangement recognizes that love is not a finite resource to be divided, but rather a force that multiplies when shared. These children have been blessed with 4 adults who, despite their past conflicts, have learned to put the girls' needs first. The ruling concluded with a personal note. As someone who has experienced the healing power of unconditional love from both biological and chosen family, I believe this arrangement offers Emma and Olivia the best of all possible worlds, the stability they need, the love they deserve, and the opportunity to heal from their past trauma surrounded by people committed to their well-being. As the judge's gavel fell, sealing the decision, Emma and Olivia broke into matching smiles. They hugged Jack and Susan, then walked over to embrace Lisa and Robert. In that moment, the courtroom witnessed the birth of a new kind of family, one built not on traditional bonds but on the foundation of understanding, forgiveness, and unconditional love. The weeks following Judge Matthews' ruling brought profound changes to the newly formed extended family. The Thompson house, once a refuge for 2 frightened little girls, transformed into a hub of healing and reconciliation. The spare room that had first sheltered Emma and Olivia was redecorated with input from all 4 parents, becoming a symbol of their collaborative future. Lisa's transformation proved the most remarkable. With the pressure of custody battles behind her, she devoted herself fully to recovery and therapy. Every Saturday morning, she arrived at the Thompson house with fresh bagels and a determination to rebuild trust with her daughters. The twins, no longer fearful of her unpredictability, gradually began sharing stories of their school days and friends. Robert Davidson found his role evolving beyond financial support. During his Sunday visits, he discovered a talent for helping the girls with science projects, his corporate efficiency giving way to genuine enthusiasm as he explained complex concepts in terms they could understand. The look of pride on his face when Emma won the school science fair was worth more than any business deal. Susan's health continued to improve as she watched her unconventional family take shape. Her experience as a child psychologist proved invaluable in helping all the adults navigate their new roles. The sight of Lisa and Robert sitting in her kitchen, seeking her advice about parenting, brought a contentment she had never expected to find. Jack's reinstatement at the hospital came with an unexpected bonus: the creation of a special unit dedicated to supporting non-traditional families during medical crises. His experience with Emma's illness and the complex family dynamics helped shape protocols that would benefit countless other families. The most profound healing, however, was visible in Emma and Olivia themselves. The shadows of fear that had once haunted their eyes gradually faded, replaced by the sparkle of security and joy. They no longer flinched at loud noises or hoarded food in their rooms. Instead, they flourished in the knowledge that they were surrounded by adults who would move heaven and earth to protect them. Family dinners became a weekly tradition, with all 4 parents and Susan gathering around the Thompsons' expanded dining table. The initial awkwardness gave way to genuine warmth as they shared stories, celebrated achievements, and worked through challenges together. Even the occasional disagreements were handled with respect and understanding, modeling healthy conflict resolution for the twins. One evening, as Emma and Olivia performed a carefully rehearsed piano duet for their assembled family, Jack caught Susan wiping away tears of joy. "Did you ever imagine," she whispered, "that saving two little girls would end up saving all of us?" The piano recital ended with enthusiastic applause from all four parents, each contributing their own unique pride and love to the moment. Emma and Olivia beamed at their audience, no longer confused by having multiple parents, but simply grateful for the abundance of love in their lives. 1 year to the day after Jack found Emma and Olivia in that snowy alley, the Thompson house glowed with warmth and celebration. Christmas lights twinkled in every window, and the aroma of Susan's famous cookies filled the air. The living room, once a quiet space dominated by Susan's illness, now barely contained the joy and laughter of their expanded family. Emma and Olivia, healthy and thriving, directed the decoration of the Christmas tree with executive precision. Each ornament had its story, the handmade ones from their school art class, the delicate glass balls Robert had brought from his European business trip, and the special first Christmas together ornament Lisa had carefully chosen. Susan sat in her favorite chair, supervising the placement of tinsel with mock seriousness, her face glowing with health and happiness. Jack watched from the doorway as his daughters, now officially and legally, argued playfully about where to hang the star. The sight of them, strong and confident, bore little resemblance to the frightened children he'd found a year ago. Emma's hair had grown back thick and golden after her illness, and Olivia's ever-present worried frown had been replaced by a ready smile. Lisa arrived bearing armfuls of presents, her 1-year sobriety chip displayed proudly on a chain around her neck. She moved with the ease of someone who had finally found peace with her place in her children's lives. The twins rushed to hug her, no longer afraid of disappointment or abandonment. Robert Davidson, dressed casually for once in a Christmas sweater instead of his usual business suit, helped Susan in the kitchen, learning the secret recipe for her Christmas cookies. His corporate empire could wait. Tonight he was simply a father, covered in flour and grinning like a schoolboy. The evening reached its peak when the twins unveiled their surprise, a dual performance of Silent Night Emma on the piano that Robert had given them, Olivia accompanying on the violin Jack had found at a yard sale. The music, slightly imperfect but filled with love, brought tears to everyone's eyes. As they gathered around the dinner table, each place set with care, Judge Matthews joined them as a special guest. She looked around at this remarkable family, Jack and Susan, the anchors who had provided stability, Lisa, who had found redemption through sacrifice, Robert, who had learned that love couldn't be bought, and at the center of it all, Emma and Olivia, who had taught them all the true meaning of family. "A year ago," Jack said, raising his glass, "I found a miracle in an alley. But the real miracle wasn't just finding Emma and Olivia. It was discovering that family isn't about blood or legal documents. It's about love, forgiveness, and choosing to be there for each other every single day." The twins exchanged knowing smiles, their hands clasped under the table as always. In their young hearts, they understood what the adults were just learning, that sometimes the best families are the ones we create ourselves, bound together not by obligation, but by choice and love. As snow began to fall outside, dusting the world in fresh white possibility, the warmth inside the Thompson house grew stronger. They had all faced their demons, confronted their fears, and emerged stronger together. This wasn't just a Christmas celebration, it was a testament to the healing power of unconditional love and the true meaning of family. Thank you for watching this heartwarming story of love, healing, and the true meaning of family. If this touched your heart, please share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear about your own experiences with unconventional families or moments of unexpected love. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories like this one. Your support helps us continue creating content that touches hearts and changes perspectives. Hit the like button if you believe in the power of love to heal and transform lives. Share this video with your friends and family. Perhaps it will help someone understand that family isn't always about blood, but about choice and love. Together we can spread the message that family comes in all forms and love knows no boundaries. Remember to turn on notifications to never miss our upcoming stories. Thank you for being part of our growing community.